Imagination, the beginning of creation. Many years ago, I would say in the late 1970s, for those of you who remember that. Is that loud enough now? Okay. But now I can't see my screen. Okay. When we were first starting to get into this past life regression stuff, remember that? My husband at that time had been into that, and he'd taken a class or something, so he practiced on me. And he took me through a couple of past lives, and it was simply really putting me into a meditative state where I was just open, and he'd ask me questions, and I would respond with whatever came to my mind. And it was kind of interesting. In one of these lives, I was Benji, an orphan who starved to death on the streets of Calcutta. In one, I was Alice Webb, a bored housewife in England, at Heatherley in England, wherever that is, wealthy, bored to death. And the most interesting one, I was Jacob Silver, and I lived in Blackpool, England, and I did not know until after this session, when I looked it up, that there actually was a city named Blackpool. How I died was I walked the plank. And the reason for that was for the heresy of wearing eyeglasses.
Really?
Okay, so what's this all about, you know? Part of me was saying, you couldn't possibly make this up. Perhaps I have, you know, tapped into the Akashic records and imagined, you know, real past lives. And then the logical part of me said, well, it's all your imagination. I'm just, you know, it's all your imagination. But that was the first time in my life that I ever begged the question, what is imagination anyway? What is imagination? Have you ever been told, oh, it's just your imagination, it's all in your head, and you dismissed it, right? Or you tried to convince yourself it was real? When someone tells us it's all in your imagination, instead of getting defensive, I think maybe we should say, yes, thank you. Instead of dismissing things like the placebo effect as just your imagination, we should harness that placebo effect and celebrate. That's my imagination at work, and it's real. Psychosomatic illnesses, too. People are saying, you're just imagining, it's all in your head. Well, yes, that has some relationship, but it's real when you're experiencing it, right? Imagination is so powerful. What a great use of our imagination for good or for what we didn't want, right? Albert Einstein, who was most likely the most intelligent person who ever lived, said imagination is more important than intelligence because imagination is the beginning of creation. It was George Bernard Shaw who said that. He said, imagination is the beginning of creation. You imagine what you desire, you will what you imagine, and at last you create what you will. And there he's pairing two unity powers, two of our 12 powers, imagination and will, right? And will is the power to persevere and to be committed. So you have your imagination, and you got to stay with it. So that was a quote from George Bernard Shaw play Methuselah, which is set in the Garden of Eden and is a conversation between Eve and the serpent, in which he says, imagination is the beginning of creation. You imagine what you desire, you will what you imagine, and at last you create what you will. Eve replies, how can I create out of nothing? And the serpent says, everything must have been created out of nothing. Look at that thick roll of hard flesh on your strong arm. That was not always there. You could not climb a tree when I first saw you, but you willed and tried, and your will created out of nothing that roll on your arm until you had your desire and could draw yourself up with one hand and seat yourself on the bough that was above your head. How strong is imagination? And I was just thinking about that quote this morning and really realizing that she built up the muscle in her arm. Sure, the cells and the potential was there all the time, but it was her will and her dedication to do the exercise that created that possibility into a real tangible thing, the muscles on her arm. So everything has been created out of nothing by the creative process, which Unity calls the law of mind action, right? So a mind, an idea, which is not a thing, it's not physical, it's no thing, is planted in mind, which is also no thing, and then it grows and manifests, and we have physicality. That's where all physical things come from. They all begin as an idea in mind. So George Bernard Shaw is my all-time favorite playwright. I have read all of his plays, which constitute 6 very thick volumes, and I've read them all twice, including all of the preludes, which are sometimes longer than the plays themselves, in which he comments on, social customs, morals, politics. He was probably at least a century ahead of himself, a brilliant man. I would call him a socialist. I think that's just about the time that socialism was starting. I don't know whether he'd call himself that or not, but he didn't identify himself particularly politically, but he was very vocal and very proselytizing, and a vegetarian, by the way, and very vocal about that as well, and a very deep thinker. I have a fridge magnet that was given to me many years ago by actually Reverend Joanna, who meant to be here today. And it said, life isn't about finding yourself, life is about creating yourself. And my magnet says anonymous. But while I was looking through many places on the internet looking for Shaw quotes, I found several that attributed that quote to Shaw. Life is not about finding yourself, it's about creating yourself. I have serious doubts that it was Shaw, because having read all his writing, it doesn't sound like his style. And I don't really think that in the early 20th century, people were into finding themselves. Sounds very 1980s to me, right? But anyway. But I found many quotes that do sound like him, and I'd like to share a few of them with you, because I think, man, if he were alive and we could get him to give a talk at Unity, it would be a humdinger. We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. That one's not particularly Unity, but I really liked it. But this one is very much Unity. Progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. Change your thinking, change your mind. That's the slogan for Centers for Spiritual Living, and we say that in other words all the time. When you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at change. Change. We're always exploring what's hidden away in our minds that needs to be changed, because our experience is reflecting that, of course. Here's a Shaw quote that I really like. To me, it's a mega lesson in our basic lesson of being responsible for ourselves. Democracy is a device that ensures we shall be governed no better than we deserve. That's the Unity teaching that liberates us. Life is not just happening to us, we are creating it individually and together. Democracy is a device that ensures we shall be governed no better than we deserve. Think about that in these days. A government that robs Peter to pay Paul can always depend upon the support of Paul. Think about that one and what we're seeing in our world today. Throughout the world, in all forms of governments, democracies, dictatorships, all of it. How we're unwilling to see that we are all needed to ensure that all of us are looked after. When we go to the polls, and we're deciding who we're going to vote for, it's like, what can this guy do for me? This guy will make my life better. Or who's going to make the greater good altogether, all one. You see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not? That's also from Methuselah. That's the serpent encouraging Eve to imagine, to will, and to create. The people who get on in this world are the people who get up and look for the circumstances they want. And if they can't find them, make them. Again, life is not just happening. Each of us can and need to take responsibility for our own happiness, for our own experiences. All those sappy love songs? You made me so very happy. No, nobody can make you happy. It's your choice. Viktor Frankl, I think of him, he was the German or Austrian psychologist who was imprisoned at Auschwitz, I think, for about 6 years. And he spent his time not, feeling sorry for himself, but serving the other prisoners the best he could. And he wrote a book, very well-known, Psychological Man's Search for Meaning. But his line was, in the most dire circumstances, the one thing they can never take from me is my ability to choose how I will respond. We have no more right to consume happiness without producing it than to consume wealth without producing it. Ever think of yourself as consuming happiness? Are you eating more than your share? But our responsibility to create our own happiness. Oh dear. Go ahead. The liar's punishment is not in the least that he is not believed, but that he cannot believe anyone else. Isn't that interesting? What goes around comes around, right? Now, if we always tell the truth, and we're always truthful and forthright, we can be pretty sure, maybe not always, but pretty sure most people are going to be the same to us. But if we're lying all the time, what we're going to experience is that people are lying to us. Because experience is a mirror of our consciousness, isn't it? All great truths begin as blasphemies. Isn't that interesting? Think about that. When we know a great truth, which we do, if we have been listening at Unity, we know a great truth, we want to share it, don't we? And sometimes that's a little difficult, it's a little risky, because if our great truth doesn't align with somebody else's great belief or great prejudice, they might label us heretics. And you know what's been said and done about heretics in the past, don't you? Like they walk the plank, right? Sometimes it takes great courage to speak the truth. What might sound like blasphemy to somebody else who has rigid beliefs. Many people thought Charles Fillmore was blasphemous when he came up with his practical Christianity. That is a reinterpretation on a metaphysical level of what the Bible is writing about and the whole story of Christianity. I think some people probably still think Charles Fillmore is blasphemous. So we need to open our minds. If it's a truly great truth, it prevails, it lasts, it endures. Few people think more than 2 or 3 times a year. I have made an international reputation for myself by thinking once or twice a week. And I know what he's referring to is conscious thinking, selecting our thoughts, not going down. Deepak Chopra always says we think 50,000 thoughts a day, most of them the same thoughts we thought yesterday. Being conscious about. And when we meditate, we say don't get hooked, just watch the thoughts go by without being hooked. Well, it's kind of the same in awareness, in awakened state. Be conscious. Don't get hooked by all that stuff you've always believed before and everybody knows. Consciously thinking for yourself. I think that's one of the beauties of Unity, is that we don't all interpret things the same way. We pride ourselves and encourage each other to think for yourselves and find a truth that feels right for you. So that's kind of mindfulness. And I think mindfulness is what I would call aware meditation. In walking meditation, if you're mindful, you're thinking more than once or twice a week, maybe. Take a deep breath for this one. Old men are dangerous. Old women too, I might say. It doesn't matter to them what is going to happen to the world. And there's some fairly young people that way too, isn't it? Well, maybe we're destroying the planet, but I'll just party hard until it's over. That's dangerous. And he said this, 150 years ago? A reflection on the prevailing belief in our world that we are separate from each other and not interconnected and don't have any responsibility to each other. See that everywhere, don't we? And now he starts to tell us what motivates him. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community. And as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. He goes on, I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle for me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I have got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. Would that we all lived that way, huh? And this one I've used before because it's just one of my favorite things. This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one. The being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. We all know that guy, don't we? And I just, when I was reading that, I hearkened back to our meeting last week in which we talked about our mission statement, and everybody had a lot of feedback and input, and it was generally well appreciated. And a couple of people had a little problem with the word mighty. And I looked up what mighty means. Possessing great and impressive power or strength. Not force, strength. And I think there's the difference because, King Arthur and the Round Table fought against might is right. And that, I think, conjured up for people that kind of sense of force and violence. But the true meaning of mighty is power or strength, or as an adjective, extremely. Abraham Lincoln observed, I have great respect for the semicolon. It's a mighty handy little fellow. Mighty good. We're doing mighty work here. It's a mighty good feeling. So, it's all in how you hold it. And one last one. I learned long ago not to wrestle with a pig. You get dirty, and besides, the pig likes it. And I really don't know what the unity lesson is in that, but I just think we should think on that. So that was George Bernard Shaw. And you all know the hypothetical question, if you could have dinner with anybody, living or dead, who would it be? And that's my guy. So what else about imagination being the beginning of creation? Are you a creative person? Probably. If so, we can be sure that you've used your imagination a lot. If you've ever knit a hat or built a birdhouse, yeah, you don't build bird cages, baked a cake, any of that stuff, you've imagined it first. You write a song, you imagine it first. You visualize it in your mind, and there's that process called creative visualization, right? There's the law of attraction. Those disciplines are all about creating using your imagination. If you've ever prayed for something, you have to have pictured it in your mind. You couldn't desire it if you couldn't imagine it. So the answer to your prayer is in the prayer itself, because as soon as you imagine it, as soon as you ask it, as soon as you speak it, see it in your mind's eye, you have started that creative process in motion. That's the beginning. The universe responds. That's the nature of that infinite force that we call God or whatever we call it. It responds to us by becoming what we imagine. It needs your will, your perseverance, to continuation of your manifestation, to keep seeing it until it shows up, right? You've got to keep your imagination geared up. Again, the analogy of planting the seed in the garden. You plant the seed and then you watch that spot, right? You come back the next day to see if anything's happening there, and you're imagining that poking through the ground and a leaf and a stem and a flower. And you keep your imagination committed to that image. Your flower, the flower knows its perfect time. And so does your desire, so is your prayer. Your prayer might manifest immediately. Sometimes it does. And if you keep your imagination, you might see signs that your desire is growing, just like when the flower starts to burst through the ground. The fulfillment of your prayer is growing in its own time. You imagine what you desire, you will what you imagine, and at last you create what you will. And faith comes into this as well, doesn't it? It's another of the Unity's 12 powers. Charles Fillmore defines faith as the substance of things unseen. So there's a universal spiritual stuff that permeates our physical world, and its potential and its infinite potential. and it's constantly being shaped by our thought, which becomes our reality. So again, you remember my analogy a couple of weeks ago about making cookies. And at some time during the process of baking cookie dough, it transforms from cookie dough to cookie. So your imagination, your desire, your prayer is the cookie dough. And you have to keep baking it with your imagination until it's done. And again, the shape of things seen is the result of the thoughts you have in mind. I don't know why this came to my mind as I was writing this, but a couple of years ago when we were at the other location, we had a glitch in the sound system just before service. And of course, panic sets in. But Brian was there that day, and he just put his head down and got to work and got it fixed. And I said, "Brian, it's magic." And Brian said this most profound thing to me. He said, "It's all magic. You just have to learn how to use the wand." Isn't that great? Imagination is the beginning of creation. I just got a couple more quotes from other authors that I discovered that had to do with imagination I'd share with you. John Lennon said, "Reality leaves a lot to the imagination." G.K. Chesterton said, "There are no rules of architecture for a castle in the clouds." Edgar Allan Poe, "Those who dream by day are cognizant of many things which escaped those who dream only by night." And Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, or something like that, "A rock pile ceases to be a rock pile the moment a single man contemplates it, bearing within him the image of a cathedral." Arthur C. Clarke, the great science fiction writer, "New ideas pass through three periods. 1, it can't be done. 2, it probably can be done, but it's not worth doing. And 3, I knew it was a great idea all along." Percy Bysshe Shelley, "A man to be greatly good must imagine intensely and comprehensively. He must put himself in the place of another and of many others. The pains and pleasures of his species must become his own." And then finally, Ursula Le Guin, "I doubt that the imagination can be suppressed. If you truly eradicated it in a child, he would grow up to be an eggplant." I got the awesome power of imagination. Imagination is the beginning of creation. I imagine achieving all I want to do and all I want for me, I also want for you. I use my will and faith to make it all come true. If I see it and believe it, I'll achieve it. So will you.
Yeah, I know that's right.
So let us just relax ourselves, compose ourselves, and prepare to go into our quiet time.